churches? Well, I've mentioned three things. There's a system of control that is set up. There is, in fact, here's a passage that violates and what they impose upon people. This is Matthew 20, verse 25, beginning. But Jesus called them unto him and said, Ye know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. Not so shall it be among you. And that is precisely what is done there. Great ones exercise control and authority over them, imposing upon them things that cannot be found in the Word of God. Now, let me ask you, can I be a Christian without having somebody over me that I have to go to and confess? Indeed I can. I read in 1 Peter, the 2nd chapter, verse 5, there's one mediator between God and man, himself man, Christ Jesus. I need not go for forgiveness of my sins through any other man. I can go directly to God in Jesus Christ. So I do not need a prayer partner. I do not need a discipler for that purpose to assign me my task, to check up on me and see how much I have prayed and impose certain hours upon me that I am to keep upon pain of the rest of the system coming down upon my head if I don't get in line. So I, without the prayer partner, or whatever you call him, what we have contemplated is appointing servants, appointing deacons. We don't have elders. So the question arises, can you have deacons without elders? Well, we'll study first of all, and it'll be review, what deacons are. We'll make some observations, and then we want to open up for your examination any questions you have, any questions we haven't covered, any questions you've been wondering about, and see what we can learn from the Word of God. First of all, on the board, we have this information, that deacons are servants. That's what the word deacon means. Deacon just means servant. The same word that is translated deacon, the same word is translated servants in the Bible. Now, you obviously have a general meaning of a term and you have a specific or technical meaning of a term. Can you give me an example besides deacons and servants when we've discussed before, where we have a word that has a general meaning, but in the Bible it is used in a specific technical way? Gardner?
Elder.
Okay, elder, which means older, and it may just mean those who are older. In 1 Timothy, the 5th chapter, it talks about the men who are elder, and you give them respect. And in this context, it's just talking about older men, because the older women you treat a certain way, the younger men you treat a certain way, the younger women you treat a certain way. So elder just generally means older, but it has a technical meaning, talking about a specific office in the New Testament church. And by office, I mean function or work, which is the meaning of the term. Okay, can you think of another one? Baptism. Baptism is just an immersion, a submersion, and anything that is submerged is baptized. But we obviously have a technical usage of that term also in what we do in relationship to Jesus Christ when we are immersed for the remission of sins. We are immersed into Jesus Christ. You've got the same thing here. There are servants, it's just a general term, but it also speaks of a specific class of servants used in a technical sense, and our translations usually call those servants deacons. Doesn't have to, could just say servants. I think it really would have clarified a lot had they not come up with the word deacon and just used the term servant. They did with the term diakonos. Diakonos is the term translated servant. And they did with diakonos just like they did with baptizo, the term for baptism. They didn't translate it, they just transliterated it and made a new word. If they translated baptizo, what would you read in your text where Jesus said, "He that believeth and is immersed shall be saved"? They didn't translate it. And where it talks about the deacons, it would just say the servants if they translated it, but they did not translate it. So whenever you think deacons, think servants. That's what they are. And there aren't two different words in the language of the New Testament to talk about that technical usage of the term in the church and just servants in general. It's all the same word. It means the same thing, servants. But in the New Testament church, there is a special class of servant. There are servants of the church. We are all servants of Christ, and we've studied that before. But not all of us who are servants of Christ have all of the qualifications that are listed in 1 Timothy 3 for this special class of servants. We get our expression of the church from Romans the 16th chapter and verse 1, where Phoebe is a servant of the church from where? Cenchrea, that's right. Come in. Of course, Phoebe was a what? Besides a servant of the church at Cenchrea. She's a woman. And Paul said she was of something of many and even of himself. What was that? Succorer or helper, some of the translations say. And if you look up the meaning of that term, translated succorer or helper, it has to do with a patron of the poor, or patron of those who are in need, or in her case, of what? Not a patron, but a patroness. And she did this on behalf of the church. So she was a helper of many as a servant of the church, a succorer of many, a patroness of many on behalf of the church. She was a servant of the church. A patron handles what in his or her work? If you've got to get funds, that's right. In fact, this article out of Floyd Chaplier's paper, not many of you have picked up and read back there, deals with that. All right, so deacons are servants. There's a special class of servants in the New Testament church who are servants of the church. They are selected and appointed. They're not just somebody who does service. All of us are supposed to do service. All of us will do good things on behalf of the kingdom, on behalf of the congregation, in subjection to Jesus Christ. But this special class of servants of the church are selected and appointed. The apostle said in Acts the 6th chapter, select 7 men. And the reason there were 7 evidently was because that's how many would be needed to oversee this task. Select 7 men whom we may appoint, or the New American Standard Version says what? Put in charge? Put in charge of this work in Acts the 6th chapter and verse 3. If these two passages, Acts 6 and Romans 16:1, are not examples of this special class of servants that are called deacons, there is nowhere in the New Testament that exemplifies or explains what the work of a deacon is. Without these two examples, there is no example, there is no description of the work of deacons. Maybe this is why sometimes in the past, beginning around the 40s, somewhere, probably in the 30s even, churches got ready to appoint elders, and they appointed elders and deacons. They appointed elders to lead the flock and oversee over them as they worked. And then they appointed deacons who did what? Nothing. They were figureheads. They just had the title, and once in a while an elder might send one on an errand somewhere or something, but they were deacons of the church. And probably because they were ignoring Acts the 6th chapter and Romans the 16th chapter. They are selected and they are appointed over a specific work or task or business. What about the statement, elders are over the work of the congregation? Is that true or false? Okay. I want somebody to say true, and then don't hang up on me yet. We're going to talk about this a while. What passage would you go to show that elders are over the work of the church? Where does the Bible say that? Is there a single passage? Ah, okay. That's right. If you oversee the flock, you're going to oversee what? You're going to oversee what the flock does, right? So secondarily, yes, I think we can say elders are over the work of the congregation. But the emphasis in the Bible, what they're really over is they are over the flock, to lead the flock, to guide the flock. is what the elders are. And in overseeing the flock, there are men under their oversight in the congregation who are designated over specific work or tasks or business. These words are used in Acts the 6th chapter in different translations, whom we may appoint over this work, whom we may appoint over this task, whom we may appoint over this business. So you have in the church a special class of servants who are selected and appointed, and they are appointed over a specific work, task, or business. So you don't have a board of deacons who just get together and say, what all can we get our thumbs into? Deacons are told, okay, you take care of the needy in the congregation. You take care of this particular business of the congregation. You take care of that particular business of the congregation. And if this person over here is in charge of a certain task, then he's not to meddle with these men over here who are in charge of a different task. This is their work. This is their work. And there's no occasion for deacons all to get together and decide what they're going to do about anything. The deacons who have to do with benevolence may do that. The deacons who have to do with maintenance of physical things, they can get together and do that. But you don't interchange the two. They are appointed over a specific work or task or business. And they possess specified qualifications, those found in 1 Timothy, the 3rd chapter. Now, let's stop for a moment and see. I'm smiling, Marlene, because I remember the last time I preached on this, what you said. Let's see if we understand what deacons are. Is there anybody who has a question about what a deacon is, or what a servant is, using the terms interchangeably, before we go any further? Okay, let me ask the question. Deacons are what? Okay, they're servants. They're servants of the church. And we've got the rest of the information on the board. Does anybody have any problem with that? When we say deacons, what are we talking about? Servants. That's what the term means. Deacon means servants. So if we say we're going to appoint deacons, what are we going to appoint? We're going to appoint servants. Okay, we got that. Then the question comes up, can you have servants selected and appointed over specific work without elders? Steve? Well, okay. Let's take the last part of that statement. We are doing it. Now, that doesn't answer whether or not we can. But that's right. We are doing it. Now, if we cannot scripturally do that, then we'd better what? We'd better take everybody who's got a responsibility that we've assigned them to do and say what? You can't do that. So there's the dilemma. If you can't have servants over specific work without elders, then you can't have servants over specific work without elders. You just have to tell anybody who's got a specific job to do on behalf of the congregation, you can't do that. Stop doing that. We can't have that. That's what it boils down to. Okay, Steve, your hand is up. Yeah, or all of us do them together. Okay, Tom.
Just can't have mass confusion just rely on everything you've done. You have to have some organization set aside so that things are done in decent order.
Okay, what kind of organization are we going to have? If there's no example, if the Lord just says, look, you guys do this and I don't care how you do it, then what kind of organization can we have? Whatever kind we please, as long as we don't violate some other principle. On the other hand, if the Lord has shown us an example of a congregation working and men set over specific tasks and the congregation working through them as servants, then what ought we to do? Follow the example, okay. So, do we have in the New Testament examples of servants in the church who have specific qualifications, who are selected and set over certain tasks? Yeah, right there. We've got two examples, Romans 16, Acts the 6th chapter. All right. So, if we're going to follow the Bible, then that's really what we ought to be doing. And if you can't do that without elders, what did those churches do in Acts 14:23 before they had elders? Okay, perhaps we're kind of narrowing this down. Now, does everybody understand what we just said? We said, can you have servants, this kind of servants, without elders? If you can't, we have men who are selected to see that people are designated for places of service, to pick the song leader, whatever else that you guys do all the time back there. I mean, they are set over that task. We have somebody set over the treasury. We have others who are set over certain works. That's fine, but if we're going to select men or women and set them over specific tasks, then what ought they to have? Yes, they ought to have the qualifications. So really, I'm afraid sometimes the churches aren't as careful today, congregations aren't as careful as they ought to be about following the New Testament pattern, about what New Testament congregations did. So it comes to this. If you don't have elders, and therefore you can't have servants, and yet you've got to have somebody in charge of things, if you don't have elders, then you can just put anybody in charge regardless of his qualifications, so long as he is nominally a Christian. But if you've got elders, all of a sudden those people that you appoint in charge of some task have got to have the qualifications. So if you don't have elders, you can get by with men of lesser quality than you can if you've got elders, is a conclusion of the idea that you can't have servants or can't have deacons without elders. What about this then? But elders and deacons are always mentioned together. Where you find one, you find the other. Laurie.
Well, it's only logical if you're going to give the qualifications for one to give the qualifications for the other ones when you're talking about qualifications.
All right. In a congregation, there are two positions where you have to have specific qualifications, besides the knowledge of the word and the ability to preach, but where you have functionaries in a congregation. They're elders and deacons, and it seems suitable that their qualifications would be together. But what about that statement? Are elders and deacons always mentioned together in the New Testament? Tom?
I would say when Paul and Barnabas going through and went back to the church today and were appointing elders, they just found them appoint elders and deacons.
That's right.
You know, they just appointed elders. And then over in Acts 6, verse, we're talking about the appointing of the servants or men over carrying the Grecian widows, we don't make any mention about elders there.
All right. So there are two examples where they're not mentioned together. And in Titus 1:5, Titus, for this cause I left thee in Crete, that thou shouldst set in order the things that are wanted, and appoint elders and deacons in every city. Now what did it say? Appoint elders in every city. Well, not mentioned together there. In Ephesians, the 20th chapter, Paul called them the elders and deacons from the church at Ephesus. No, not mentioned together there. In fact, there are only two places I know in the New Testament where they're mentioned together. In Philippians, the first chapter, it addresses the church of Philippi with the elders, bishops, and saints. I mean, elders with the bishops, deacons, and saints. Well, if you're going to argue because elders and bishops are mentioned there, what have you got to conclude? That you've also got to have, and whenever you have saints, you've got to have elders. And yet in Acts 14:23, before that point, they didn't. You had saints, you had them in congregations, but they didn't have elders. So you had saints, but they didn't have elders. Whether they had deacons, we don't know whether they had deacons or not. But when you get down to it, more times than not, they are not mentioned together. Only twice I know of that they're mentioned together. Philippians 1:1, and then the qualifications are given together in 1 Timothy, the 3rd chapter. All right? Do you have any questions about? We first asked, do you have any questions about what a deacon is? A deacon is a servant of the congregation, set over a specific task, and he possesses specific qualifications. You have a certain class of servants. That's what deacons are. And asked if there were any questions there, and there weren't. Now we have said, can you have servants without elders? And we've discussed that briefly. Now, are there any questions about that? Okay. Now, what we were contemplating was appointing some new servants. We obviously have some servants already. Some were selected when we had elders, before all our elders were moved and transferred out. Did they cease being servants, possessing these qualifications, and over a certain task, just because the elders all moved? No, they didn't cease. They kept doing the same thing they were doing. Well, we've contemplated recognizing what we're doing. We've contemplated selecting and appointing some other servants for some other tasks. Now, does anybody have any questions about that? Okay, Charlotte.
Well, I have a question about something you haven't said.
Okay.
The third line selection and appointed, are you including that Romans 16:1?
Phoebe, yes, would have been selected and appointed, yes. Uh-huh. I mean, I don't think she just took it upon herself to be a servant of the congregation. If she's a servant of the congregation, I believe the congregation would have something to say about that necessarily. Okay? So what you're asking is, could we choose and appoint a woman over some task on behalf of the congregation? Is that what you're asking? Okay. What's the answer to that? Yes, we got Romans the 16th chapter as an example. That's right. Okay. And there are many things that women can do that men will not have access to. Younger widows who need a lot of help in the congregation. Who is best going to be able to go into their home and give them assistance? Some man? Some woman can best assist them. And there are a lot of works like that. Of course, if you raise your eyebrows, I mean, what's wrong with a man going into the home of all the young widows and getting chummy and helping? First of all, what looks like the outside world, and two, that's just not wise to do. That's not very discreet. Problems do arise when things like that happen. It's not surprising then that there were in the New Testament church women who were in the position of servants. Okay? Gardner.
What about the objection that the qualifications say that they must be the husband of one wife?
Okay. Turn over 1 Timothy 3. I'd forgotten to cover that point, so it's a good thing that came up. Starting in verse 8, translate that first word for me in verse 8. Servants. Servants, not double-tongued, not given much wine, not greedy of filthy lucre, holding the mystery of the faith in a pure conscience, so forth and so on. Verse 12, no, we need verse 11. Then in verse 11, tell me what the King James Version says, somebody who has the King James text.
Even so, must their wives be grave, slanderers, sober, faithful in all things.
All right. The pronoun there is not in the text. I suppose it's shown by being in italics in your Bibles. Okay. The American Standard Version says, women in like manner must be grave. Well, I mean, isn't there a different word for women and wives? I mean, shouldn't the translator be able to tell whether that should be woman or wives? And the answer to that's no. The same word in the New Testament is translated woman and wife. You have to determine from the context whether to call it wife or whether to call it woman. That's the word there in Greek. There it is phonetically in the New Testament. Now, ladies, I didn't choose that word. That's the Greek word for woman or wife. And it's not goon. It's not quite like that bad. It's gune is the term for woman or the term for wife. And the King James translators did some interpreting here. And they assumed that this is the wives of the deacons, and they said their wives. The American Standard translators said, no, I don't think that's so. It is just women. So, while they're talking about the qualifications for servants who are men, they also mention the servants who are women. Women, in like manner, must be grave, not slanderous, temperate, faithful in all things. Let deacons, servants, masculine, be husbands of one wife, ruling their children in their own house as well. So, in Romans, the 16th chapter, where it mentions Phoebe, who's a servant of the church, it's the same term, only it's the feminine form, because it is speaking of a woman. Here in 1 Timothy, the 3rd chapter, in verse 8, it's in the masculine form. And in verse 12, when it says, let them be the husbands of one wife, it is in the masculine form. But right in the middle of all of that, it also says, women in like manner must be grave, not slanderous, temperate, faithful in all things. You know, okay, Bob, let's see if you're anticipating what I'm going to say. Go ahead.
I never noticed it before. I don't know if I'm correct in this, but in 12 it says deacons, the husbands of one wife. It doesn't indicate that the woman, if indeed that word woman has to be married.
No.
Does it indicate, but it indicates that the man has to be married.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Unless you translate the word as wives.
Unless you translate as wives. Then what you've got is that deacons' wives have to have what that who doesn't have to have?
No, I didn't say deacon's wife. I just said wife.
Okay.
I didn't say deacon.
Okay. Go ahead and make your point, because I'm going to another one then.
No, the point was that one translation says their wives.
Uh-huh. Oh,
Another
that's right.
translation says woman.
Mm-hmm.
No translations just say wives.
That's right. So
Anybody's wife.
it should be women or wives. Okay. But right in the middle of the qualifications for the masculine servant, it also talks about women in qualifications. Now, if this is their wives, the deacons' wives, then what do deacons' wives have to have that elders' wives don't have to have? Are there any specific qualifications for being an elder's wife? Except being in subjection to your husband so that he can qualify to be an elder. That's all. And I think people would probably recognize the graver responsibility in being an elder than in a deacon. And the qualifications are a bit more extensive in regard to the family for the elder than the deacon. So why make a point of the deacon's wife having to have qualifications when the elder's wife doesn't have to have qualifications? So, evidently, it is not wives that should be understood by this term. And remember, the same term means women and wives. You have to determine from the context. So contextually speaking, since elders' wives are not given specific qualifications, it doesn't sound reasonable that deacons' wives should be given qualifications. So when women are mentioned here, they are the women servants like whom? Like who? Phoebe. Yes, like Phoebe was. So, yes, let the men deacons, because that is masculine, be husbands of one wives. Women who are servants, and that's what it's talking about. It's talking about servants, and women then must be grave, not slanderous, temperate, faithful in all things. Okay?
But answering Robert's question, therefore they don't have to be married.
Evidently not. Now, here's another thing. Let's just kind of hold in abeyance. But we might as well touch upon it because we're going to have time to, it looks like. Who are these women in 1 Timothy 5 who are enrolled or taken into a number? What are they enrolled in, or what number they take? taken into. They are widows indeed, and they're going to be supported by whom? Can any needy widow, regardless of her age, can any needy single woman, regardless of her age, be helped and cared for by the church? Yes. But these have certain qualifications. They have to be 60 years old. Where are the rest of these qualifications? Beginning in verse 9. Yes, having been the wife of one man, well reported of for good works, if she hath brought up children, if she hath used hospitality to strangers, if she hath washed the saints' feet, if she hath relieved the afflicted, if she hath diligently followed every good work. In other words, if she has proven herself capable of service, then she is enrolled or she is taken into some number, and her qualifications qualify her for service. So, besides just women in general who have these qualifications in 1 Timothy 3 and verse 11, it appears that there was another class of women who were supported by the congregation. And I say appears because I'm not dogmatic on this. This is what I believe about it, but I've just not been able to nail this down, so I'm not going to try to nail it down and be dogmatic for you. But it appears besides women who possess these other qualifications, there was another group of women servants who were being supported by the congregation, and they had to have these qualifications before they were enrolled in this capacity. But remember, any needy woman or man could be supported by a congregation where it was needed. But these were being enrolled in what? In something wherein they were supported. Tom.
I see it says honor them back there. In the original back over in Acts 6, that's one of the services that the apostle thought that it was needed because the Grecian widow was being neglected. So there was that class that was recognized at that time. I don't know if it's the distress within, Jerusalem at the time, prior to a number of persecutions, but we do find, shortly thereafter, Paul was fined several chains, having him in prison.
Well, you had Jews who had come from all over the world for Pentecost and that obeyed the gospel, and then what happened? They stayed there. And they were having to sell houses and lands to take care of the members, but then found out that the Grecian widows who had nobody to care for them were being neglected. So somebody needs to see after them and see that they're taken care of. So they appointed 7 men to serve tables, which is the verb form of the word that is translated deacon. And it's the reason we make the tie-in there. Okay, anything else? Okay, so that you contemplate, or so that you understand what we're contemplating. And we've taken it slow, and we want to make sure that everyone understands what we're doing. We're trying to achieve consensus, and that is, we need some men designated as servants over certain tasks. And we want to make sure that we appoint the right kind of men over them, and we don't have elders. And so we've discussed, can we have deacons? Can we have servants without elders? And we've considered that obviously so, and we've noted that we do, and if we can't, then we better get rid of them, because we do have some servants who've been selected and appointed over specific tasks. If you can't have that without elders, then we have to get rid of the fellows who are functioning in those areas. So, if after talking about this, we have reached a unanimity of understanding, then we will be proceeding to have more selected and appointed over the various tasks that have been chosen to have men to look, not only men, I suppose women also, to look after. Mattie Lee.
Could I ask a question?
Yes.
Why do you think in chapter 5 of 1 Timothy that they speak just of widows? Women.
Looking at verse 10, 11, younger widows refuse. So it's not just widows, it's older widows. For when they have waxed wanton against Christ, they desire to marry, having condemnation because they rejected their first pledge, and withal they learn also to be idle, going about from house to house, and not only idle, but tattlers also, and busybodies, speaking things which they ought not. So the idea in the younger widows, and I'm going to get to your question, is if you just completely support them, they're not likely to fulfill the responsibilities of service, as well as these women who have proved themselves, and they're going to have idle time on their hands, and that's going to be destructive. So for this class, Maddie Lee, those who are going to be completely supported by the congregation to do something for the congregation, or to do something anyhow, he wants widows 60 years old and older for that group. Now, if you can have servants without support who are men, then I suppose you could have servants without support who are women, such as Phoebe evidently was. But here is a group of women doing something, and they're going to be supported by the congregation. And so the younger women evidently are given charge, okay, do what you can for yourself. If you fall short, we'll help you as a needy saint. But we're taking these into the number, and we're going to support them. And the church is going to be at charge for them, according to verse 16. So, the younger women evidently have more ability to get out and help themselves than the older women did, Madeline.
But my point still is that it just doesn't say women as widows.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the part that I'm still fighting with myself, because here from verse 3, starts in the honor widows that are widows of Jesus.
Yep.
The widow has children or nephews. And now backing up a couple of verses up above that, it says the elder women, then it says rebuke not an elder, but speaking of the father, and the younger women, brethren, the elder women as mothers. Now, see, this is not when they're talking about the office of the servant. Then when it gets down here, they're going to take into number, it seems like they're widows.
They are widows, yes. These are widows all the way through, I believe, Maddie Lee.
But the different classes of the servant versus the class of the servant that, or qualification of the servant that Phoebe was.
Yeah. This, really, we're just kind of answering a question here. And this, I don't think, is necessarily relevant to what we're anticipating doing. But, oh, okay.
I was just trying to get it very clear in my own mind that here you're saying that when it comes to the men, back here when we're talking about wives and so forth, you're saying it's not necessarily wives they're talking about.
Right.
It might have just been women.
Yes.
All right, now at this point, then, I think this specifically says widows.
Mm-hmm.
Here at this point, as we were thinking of the church, and not just women. And the thing is, I'm trying to get it very clear in my mind.
Yeah, the way the Bible wants it to. Okay, Maddie Lee. I can't do that for you because I have a personal conclusion about these women in 1 Timothy 5. But I can't prove that they are being used as servants. I can't prove that they're what we're talking about here. There are many things that cause me to believe they are, their qualifications. So that it appears that we've got this, Maddie Lee, men or women. But besides that, then here is an opportunity to use some older women who really need support. And while we're supporting them, there is something they can do also. But before you are enrolled or taken into this number, you've got to be a widow 60 years old. Now, to be a servant of the church, you don't have to be. But to be a servant of the church on this basis, you've got to be a widow and you've got to be 60 years old. If this is talking about service. But as far as establishing what we've got on the board, can we have servants without elders, men or women, we don't even need 1 Timothy 5 in what we discussed. First Timothy 5 is speaking about a different group of women who are widows indeed, and they are enrolled, they are taken into a number, they have qualifications that qualify them for service. Is that what they are being designated? I don't know. I believe so. The female servants. No, the men have to be, yes. Yes. Uh-huh. Yes. The men servants. Because I suppose just in the position of man and woman in life, that men are probably going to be appointed, not probably, but will be appointed to positions where they may be over some other people, and you're not going to appoint a woman who's going to be over some men. So it's not unusual that you find more extensive qualifications for men servants than women servants, I believe. The male deacon has to be married. The female deacon, yes, and the female deacon must be grave, not slander, temperate, faithful in all things. Okay. All right, quickly. We have studied what deacons are, and I think we've reached a conclusion. Whether everybody's convinced or not, and I don't know everybody may be, we'll find out as time goes on, but that indeed we may have servants without elders. And in the New Testament there were men servants and there were women servants. Now, some of the touchy things about 1 Timothy 5, that's problematic. I don't know all the answers to that. Okay, Steve. Did you pass out Ezekiel? Next time. You can have fun with Ezekiel. Mm-hmm. Yes, unless it comes down to being really what the scriptures direct us to, then, and that's really what we're working at, to come to some understanding so that we see really what we ought to be doing. Be better to take our time, which is what we're doing.